The morning sun had barely risen over the quiet hills of Cedar Hill when the low rumble of a vintage engine rolled down Highway 27. It wasn't flashy, no chrome polish, no roaring display, just the deep, steady growl of a 1969 Harley-Davidson cutting through the misty dawn like a whisper from the past. At the handlebars sat Samuel Reed, 81 years old. His back was straight, his grip steady, his eyes hidden behind weathered aviator sunglasses. The lines on his face were carved not just by time, but by memory, some kind, some cruel. His farm was 10 miles behind him, his destination, Murphy's Hardware downtown. The tractor's hydraulic system had jammed again, and Samuel knew exactly what part he needed. After all, he'd fixed machines longer than most people in town had been alive. He slowed at the town's entrance, where a gas station sat quiet under the amber glow of the morning light. The motorcycle came to a halt beside the curb, its engine easing into a patient idle. But just as Samuel reached for the kickstand, red and blue lights bloomed behind him. He looked into his mirror and saw the patrol cruiser pulling in fast, dust curling in its wake. No siren, just urgency. The driver's door opened. Out stepped a young officer, Rachel Monroe, 29, clean uniform, mirrored sunglasses, every step measured. A second officer, Mike Sanders, trailed behind with the slow gait of someone who had already made up his mind. Rachel narrowed her eyes. Is this some kind of joke? Samuel didn't respond. He didn't flinch. Just sat there, hands resting calmly on the handlebars, his expression unreadable. Sir, turn off the bike and step off, Rachel said, her tone already edged. One hand hovered near her holster. Samuel complied silently. He turned the key. The engine gave one final breath and fell quiet. The only sound was the breeze shifting the American flag across the street. License and registration. Samuel reached into his jacket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. Everything was neatly arranged. He handed the documents to Rachel without a word. She looked them over. 81, she said aloud, raising an eyebrow. Don't you think you're a little too old to be riding a motorcycle like this? Sanders smirked. This Harley's older than my dad. Look at that rust. Rachel took a step forward. Sir, put your hands on the bike, feet shoulder width apart. Samuel obeyed, still without speaking. A small crowd had begun to gather. A couple of early commuters, a mother pushing a stroller, and across the street, the gas station owner, Alan Crew, watched intently from under the awning. He squinted, then froze. He recognized Samuel. Rachel continued, Mr. Reed, do you live nearby? I do, he answered softly. 10 miles west, off County Road 14. Alone? Yes. Do you have family? Someone who looks after you? Samuel looked at her and said simply, I look after myself. Rachel exchanged a glance with Sanders. It was the kind of look that said, we've got a confused old man here. Sir, don't you think it's irresponsible to be riding a motorcycle at your age? Your reflexes, your vision, there's a safety concern. I've been riding since I was 16, he replied. I've never caused an accident. Rachel pressed on, louder now. Do you understand what I'm saying? He didn't answer right away. His eyes drifted past her, toward the hills, not distracted, just distant, as if listening to something no one else could hear. Sanders leaned in and muttered, maybe he's a little deaf. Rachel stepped closer. Mr. Reed, if you don't respond, I'll have to bring you in for evaluation. We can't let you ride off in this condition. Alan, still watching, pulled out the phone and walked into his shop. He didn't call the police. He called Fort Ridge Military Base. Hello, he said urgently. This is Alan Cruz. I think you have a retired officer in trouble. His name is Samuel Reed. The call barely lasted 90 seconds. On the other end of the line at Fort Ridge Military Base, the moment the officer heard the name Samuel Reed, his posture straightened, his voice dropped, his fingers flew across the keyboard. You're sure? Yes, he's being questioned by two officers in downtown Cedar Hill right now. There was a long pause, then, understood. Stay where you are. We're sending a team. Do not let anything happen to Colonel Reed. Alan hung up and stepped back outside, his heart thumping in his chest. Across the street, Samuel was still standing beside his bike, silent, still. But the tension around him was sharp enough to cut the morning air. Officer Rachel Monroe was agitated. Her voice was louder now. Mr. Reed, this is your last warning. You're endangering yourself and others. You'll have to come with us for medical and psychological evaluation. Samuel's hands were loosely folded behind his back. He was calm, eerily calm. His eyes never left the horizon. The more they pressured him, the stiller he became. I'm not going, he said quietly. Rachel blinked. Excuse me? I said I'm not going. Sanders stepped forward. Sir, don't make this harder than it has to be. Samuel turned his gaze toward them. It wasn't defiant. It wasn't hostile. It was patient. The kind of patience forged on battlefields and hardened by decades of watching young people underestimate the weight of silence. Back at the gas station, Alan couldn't stop watching. He whispered to himself, Hold on, Colonel. They're coming. And they were. Miles away, 12 military Humvees thundered down the main road toward Cedar Hill, tires biting into the asphalt, dust exploding behind them. Inside the lead vehicle sat Captain Grace Holloway, 43, decorated combat strategist and former protege of Colonel Reed. She wasn't just coming out of duty. She was coming for the man who trained her to lead. Back on Main Street, a crowd had now gathered. Some filmed, others whispered. Most watched in discomfort as a proud old man stood being publicly treated like a fragile liability. Whispers floated, Isn't that the guy who lives near Red Rock Farm? He's harmless, polite, brings apples to the market every week. Why are they treating him like a criminal? Rachel tapped her radio. Dispatch, Cedar Hill PD requesting medical escort for a possible mental health case. Male, 81, non-compliant. Then something changed. A deep, rising thunder, low and unfamiliar, rolled across the quiet street. Sanders glanced toward the curve at the edge of town. What the hell is that? The roar grew louder. The wind shifted, dust stirred. Then they appeared. 12 olive green Humvees swept around the bend and surged toward them in formation. They didn't slow until they reached the gas station. Then, like a carefully choreographed drill, they fanned out in a half circle, boxing in the police cruiser and the sidewalk. Doors slammed open. 40 soldiers stepped out in synchronized precision. Weapons holstered. Faces stern. No word spoken. From the lead Humvee, Captain Grace Holloway stepped down. Rachel froze. What is this? Holloway ignored her entirely. She walked straight toward Samuel Reed, heels clicking in a slow, steady rhythm. 3 meters from him, she stopped, stood tall, then raised her hand in a crisp salute. Colonel Reed, ma'am reporting. A stunned silence fell over the street. Someone dropped their phone. Samuel finally turned to look her in the eye, then gave a faint nod. Rachel stammered. Colonel, he's... What? Captain Holloway turned her head, her gaze slicing through Rachel like a blade. Did you stop this man? Rachel swallowed. Yes, I mean, we didn't know who he was. He looked... This man, Holloway interrupted coldly, commanded reconnaissance units in Vietnam, coordinated special ops in the Gulf, trained hundreds of our best officers, including me. Sanders paled. We were just following protocol. No, you were following your assumptions. The soldiers took one collective step forward and an unspoken wall of solidarity. Captain Holloway didn't raise her voice, but her words cut with perfect precision. You humiliated a decorated war hero in public. Not for what he did, but for what you thought he was. The town of Cedar Hill had never been so quiet. No sirens, no wind, just breath held in the throats of everyone standing on Main Street, waiting to see what would happen next. Officer Rachel Monroe stood rooted to the pavement, her fingers twitching slightly by her belt. Her training hadn't prepared her for this. Not the arrival of a full military convoy, not the word colonel, and certainly not the soldier now standing in front of her, eyes sharp, voice steady, commanding without needing to shout. Captain Grace Holloway didn't blink. "This man is a legend in our forces," she said. "Colonel Samuel Reed served this nation longer than either of you has been alive, and you treated him like a liability because he dared to grow old in public." Rachel opened her mouth to speak, but found no words. Sanders shifted beside her, glancing at the camera phones pointed their way. Colonel Reed remained quiet, arms folded behind his back. He didn't demand an apology. He didn't seek an audience. He just watched the moment unfold like he'd seen it all before. Because he had. Across the street, Alan Cruz stepped out from behind the gas station counter. He locked the door behind him and crossed toward the crowd, nodding respectfully as he approached the soldiers. His voice was calm, but it carried. "This man," he said, pointing to Samuel, "has filled his tank here for 15 years. He checks in on my wife's garden when she's sick, brings us peaches from his orchard every June. You never see it on the news, but the people who carry the most weight in this country do it without medals on their chest." The murmurs in the crowd grew softer. Some people lowered their phones. Others looked away, ashamed. Captain Holloway glanced at Officer Monroe again. "Do you know what it takes to earn a Distinguished Service Cross?" Rachel shook her head faintly. "It means he saved lives, not just once, over and over, often while risking his own." There was a long pause, then finally Colonel Reed spoke. "Captain," he said, his voice gravelly but firm. "Let them be, ye." Holloway turned. "Sir, there's been enough noise. What matters now is whether they learn." He looked directly at Rachel. His gaze wasn't angry. It wasn't cold. It was knowing. "I trained hundreds of young soldiers who thought they had the world figured out," he said. "They were brave, smart, but they made the same mistake, judging too quickly, listening too slowly." Rachel lowered her head. "I didn't know who you were." "That's not the problem," Reed replied. "You didn't try to find out." His words hung in the air like dust in the morning light. A few steps back, Sanders muttered, "He should have just explained." Captain Holloway turned on him in a flash. "He didn't owe you anything." The silence that followed was not empty. It was loud with realization. Every onlooker felt it, the weight of assumption, the cost of casual disrespect, the shame of seeing age and wisdom dismissed in real time. Then came the shift. One by one, people stepped forward, not to gawk, not to argue, but to honor. A man in a denim work shirt removed his baseball cap. A teenage boy lowered his phone and nodded silently. Even a small girl clutching her mother's hand whispered, "He's brave, isn't he?" Reed smiled at her. "Some days." Alan Cruz cleared his throat. "Sir, if it's all right, I'd like to offer you coffee inside. Fresh pot just finished." Reed nodded slowly. "I'd appreciate that." But before he turned, he looked once more at Rachel Monroe. "Every job has power," he said. "Not the kind that comes from a badge or a gun, but from the way you treat people who can't fight back." Rachel felt those words like a stone in her chest. "I want to do better," she whispered. Reed gave her the smallest nod. "Then do." And with that, he walked across the street, between rows of soldiers who stood at attention, not for a show, but as a corridor of respect, the kind of silent tribute that no ceremony could replicate. The Harley sat patiently under the tree near the gas station, still rusted, still loud, still alive, just like the man who rode it. The following morning, a quiet storm brewed inside the Cedar Hill Police Department. Sheriff Douglas Avery, a man of routine and slow speech, sat behind his desk with the phone still warm in his hand. His short call with Captain Holloway had ended moments ago, but the echo of her voice stayed with him like static in his ears. She wasn't asking, he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. She was telling. The file on his desk was thin but heavy. It bore the name Samuel Reed, and inside was a photocopy of his license, notes from yesterday's stop, and scribbled statements from Officers Monroe and Sanders. Outside his office, the mood was tense. A whisper had gone through the ranks. Not gossip, but a warning. Something was coming. At 9:00 a.m. sharp, Avery called an emergency meeting. The briefing room, usually casual and half empty, was packed. Uniforms stiff, faces pale. The projector hummed softly in the corner as Avery took his place in front of the room. "Before we begin," he said, "I need to be clear. We're not here to throw anyone under the bus." He looked directly at Rachel Monroe. She sat upright, but her hands were clasped tightly in her lap. "But we are here," he continued, "because what happened yesterday can't happen again." The screen behind him flickered to life. A video played, footage from a phone across the street. Colonel Reed standing calmly beside his Harley. The officers are demanding, inspecting, and escalating. Then the arrival of the military convoy. Captain Holloway's salute, and the soldiers stepped forward in unison. No narration. No commentary, just truth, unfiltered. When the video ended, silence pressed down on the room like gravity. Every phone in that crowd was watching, Avery said. Every screen in the state might see it soon. We're lucky it didn't blow wider, because the Army handled it with grace. He took a breath. But that's not why this matters. His voice dropped. It matters because an old man American veteran was judged unfit for no reason other than his age and the way he looked on a machine built before half of us were born. A murmur of discomfort ran through the room. Avery gestured to Rachel. "Officer Monroe, would you like to speak?" Rachel stood. Her voice wavered, but she didn't look away. "I made assumptions," she said. "I saw someone who looked out of place and let my discomfort speak louder than my judgment. I didn't ask questions. I issued orders." No one interrupted. "I let protocol become a shield. But what I failed to see was a man who's been living by principles I should have understood. Discipline, patience, and service." She paused. "I know I don't deserve his forgiveness, but I will earn the right to do this job with the dignity I denied him." The room was still. Sheriff Avery nodded once. "Which is why, starting Monday, all officers will report to Fort Ridge for a new program, a training in veteran interaction, trauma-informed communication, and most importantly, humility." By Wednesday, word had spread far beyond Cedar Hill. News outlets reached out to Fort Ridge for comment. A small op-ed appeared in the local paper titled, "When Experience is Mistaken for Incompetence." The author? A college student who'd witnessed the stop and had been changed by it. At the military base, Captain Holloway reviewed the new curriculum personally. She included a quote from Colonel Reed himself. "People don't always need to salute you. Sometimes they just need to see you." Meanwhile, Officer Rachel Monroe made her journey. Down Highway 27, past the orchards, past the field of sunflowers swaying in the June heat. She parked the cruiser not far from where the Harley had been spotted a week earlier. Samuel Reed was in his garden, trimming rose bushes with a steady hand. She approached slowly. No sunglasses, no badge showing. Just a woman holding a folded letter. "Colonel Reed?" she asked. He looked up, eyes calm. "I wanted to give you this," she said, offering the letter with both hands. He took it, unfolded it, read it. It wasn't a report. It wasn't a formal apology. It was her handwritten commitment to listen more, to judge less, to never forget the silence he held while others shouted. He folded the note and slipped it into his shirt pocket. "You want some coffee?" he asked with a soft smile. Rachel nodded. Only if you'll let me make it this time. 2 weeks later, on a sunlit Saturday morning, the town square of Cedar Hill was different. Bunting fluttered in soft red, white, and blue strands. Folding chairs lined the edges of the courthouse lawn. A modest stage stood at the base of the old war memorial, surrounded by families, veterans, officers, and townspeople who had seen the video or felt the shift. But Colonel Samuel Reed hadn't seen the flyer. He had received a phone call. "We'd be honored if you joined us," Sheriff Avery had said, voice earnest. "No speeches required, just presence." So Reed came, quietly, no uniform, just his old leather jacket, jeans, and the boots he'd worn for over a decade. He parked the Harley under a maple tree near the square and took a seat near the back. He was content to watch. But the crowd had other plans. As the opening notes of the national anthem faded, Sheriff Avery stepped forward. His voice trembled slightly under the weight of his regrets. "We're here today not for ceremony," he said, "but for reflection." A moment of error became a moment of reckoning, and from it, something better has begun. He paused. "Colonel Samuel Reed, would you join us?" The crowd turned. At first, Reed didn't move. Then slowly, deliberately, he stood. As he walked toward the stage, something unexpected happened. Every officer in uniform rose to their feet, then the veterans, then the townspeople. Not a sound was spoken, but the message was unmistakable. "We see you now." He stepped onto the platform, nodded politely to the sheriff, and turned to face the people of Cedar Hill. He didn't speak for long. "I didn't come here to be honored," he said. "I came to remind you that respect isn't something we reserve for uniforms. It's something we owe each other, on principle." He looked down at the front row where Officer Rachel Monroe sat, hands folded in her lap. "We all make mistakes," he continued, "but the road to redemption is always open, as long as we're willing to ride it." The crowd clapped, not out of politeness, but out of understanding. Later that afternoon, the police department unveiled a new addition to its front lawn, a bronze bench, curved and simple, with a quote etched along the back. "Before you speak or speak, ask what story you don't yet know." Next to it stood a small plaque that read, "In honor of Colonel Samuel Reed, for reminding us what service, silence, and strength truly look like." Reed didn't stay long. He shook hands, shared a coffee with Alan Cruz, nodded once at Rachel Monroe, who handed him a small booklet she'd written. "Listening first, lessons I learned too late." Then with a quiet smile, he walked back to his Harley. No fanfare, no fuss, just the roar of the engine, a trail of dust behind the wheels, and an open road ahead. Message of the story ever: judge a life by how it looks today. B is behind every wrinkle, every silence, is a story of battles fought, lessons earned, and dignity that deserves to be seen.